The little girl ran straight through the curtain of cigarette smoke and motorcycle shine, as if fear had burned away every lesson she had ever been taught about strangers. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her yellow rain boots were unlaced. One of them slapped against the pavement harder than the other because she was limping. Her thin cardigan hung off one shoulder, damp from the evening mist, and there was a purple crayon still tucked behind her ear like she had been interrupted in the middle of being a child. She didn't slow down when she saw the men, didn't hesitate at the leather vests, didn't flinch at the tattoos, didn't care that engines were still ticking hot beneath rows of black motorcycles lined outside Mercy Lane Diner. She ran right up to the biggest one there, caught his wrist with both trembling hands, and sobbed the words so hard they seemed to tear her throat on the way out. "They're beating my mama." Everything changed in the half-second after that, because men who had been laughing over coffee went silent. Because one of them set down his mug so gently it made no sound at all. Because the child did not say, "Help, please," the way children do in stories. She said, "I didn't know where else to go." And if you believe that the world is still held together by the people who answer that kind of cry, take a second to like this story, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes kindness can arrive wearing unexpected faces. Some of the safest hearts in this world do not come wrapped in softness. Sometimes they arrive in thunder. The man whose wrist she had grabbed was called Bear, though his mother had named him Isaiah Cole 52 years earlier in a hospital 3 counties away. He was broad in the chest, gray at the temples, and built with the heavy stillness of a man who had once known violence too well and had spent the rest of his life learning not to hand it out cheaply. A healed scar split one eyebrow. His beard was salt and iron. On the back of his vest, above the faded patch of the Iron Saints Riders, there was a smaller patch that read, "Children's Shelter Fund Run." He looked down at the little girl kneeling against his leg and saw 3 things all at once: fresh terror, old terror, and the kind of exhaustion no child should know. "What's your name, baby?" he asked, and his voice, despite everything about him, sounded like a blanket being lifted around someone's shoulders. Addie what?" She swallowed so hard it hurt to watch. "Addie me Dawson." "Okay, Addie me, look at me," she tried. Her eyes were huge and wet and wild. "Who is hurting your mama?" "My daddy." "And Kenny?" Her breath hitched. "He came over mad and they started shoving and mama fell and she broke apart, clutching at his hand with both fists. She told me hide, but I heard her scream." At the word scream, 3 more bikers were already moving. One was Slim, who looked carved out of fence posts and old grief, with a Vietnam veteran's posture and the quiet reflexes of someone who never wasted steps. One was Tessa, the only woman in the chapter that night, a former ER nurse with silver rings in both ears and an expression that could stop panic before medicine even entered the room. And one was Deacon, thick-necked and dark-skinned and gentle-eyed, who drove a tow truck by day and had 6 foster children's drawings zip-tied inside his workshop locker. Bear crouched, lowering himself until he and Addie were face to face. "Where?" She pointed with a shaking finger beyond the diner's parking lot, past the blinking soda sign, toward a row of old duplexes crouched behind a convenience store and a fenced patch of dead grass. Apartment 3B's porch light was out. The upstairs window glowed the weak orange of a lamp with a crooked shade. Slim was already dialing 911. Tessa removed her own leather jacket and wrapped it around Addie's shoulders, swallowing the child in weathered black. "You stay with me, sweetheart." But Addie caught Bear's sleeve again, almost frantic. "Don't let them stop breathing," she whispered. The men stared. Children who grow up around violence do not ask for revenge first. They ask for survival. It told Bear almost everything. He stood in one motion. "Slim, cops now, Deacon with me." "Tessa, keep her here. Nobody goes in hot. We stop it, hold it, and let the law take it from there. No chest beating. no cinematic threats. Just the kind of calm that only comes from people who know exactly how bad things can become when angry men pretend they are heroes. As they crossed the lot, the evening seemed to sharpen around them. Rain tapped the chrome tanks. A neon open sign buzzed in the diner window. Somewhere far off, a freight train sounded its lonely iron horn. In apartment 3B, something crashed hard enough to rattle the glass. Bear's jaw flexed. Inside that apartment, Marisol Dawson, Rosa to everybody who knew her well, was on her knees beside the broken coffee table, tasting blood and splintered dust. She was 31 years old and looked older only when she was afraid. Her dark hair, usually tied in a clean braid for waitressing shifts, had come loose around her face. Her left cheek was already swelling. One sleeve of her thrift store blouse had torn at the seam. The tiny apartment smelled of bleach, fried onions, and the pot of rice she had started before everything went bad. Kenny Bell, her ex-husband, smelled like whiskey and righteous failure. Dale Mercer, Kenny's cousin, who had come just to talk, smelled like gasoline and cheap aftershave and the kind of trouble that never arrives alone. Rosa had spent years mastering the mathematics of danger, how to answer without provoking, how to stand near doors, how to keep her daughter in the room furthest from the shouting, how to smile at work so no one asked why her wrist was bruised in finger-shaped half-moons again. She had left Kenny once already. It had taken every dollar in a coffee can, every double shift, and every fragment of courage she could sew together. But leaving a man is not the same thing as being free from him, especially when poverty keeps your address easy to find and the law slow to care. That night he had come demanding money he said she owed him, money for child support he had never paid, money for a truck that wasn't hers, money, finally, for the insult of being told no. When she refused, he slapped her. When Dale laughed, Kenny shoved her into the coffee table. When she heard Addie cry out from the bedroom, Rosa did the one thing mothers do in impossible moments. She locked eyes with her daughter and mouthed, "Run." Now Kenny was towering over her, chest heaving, not yet done with his own shame. "You think you're too good for me now," he barked. Rosa braced one hand on the floor and got halfway up. "I think you need to leave." It would have been a brave line in another story. In this story, it got her kicked in the ribs. At that exact moment, the front door came off the chain with a crack that sounded like judgment arriving. Bear didn't burst in wild. He entered like a storm with rules. "Step away from her." Every head snapped toward him. Behind him stood Deacon and Slim, filling the doorway with leather, rain, and consequence. Slim still had dispatch on speaker. Tessa, who had handed Addie to the diner owner, had followed after all and was already taking in Rosa's breathing, the blood at her lip, the angle of her shoulder. Kenny blinked first, confusion cutting through rage. "Who the hell are you?" "The men," Bear said. "The child went and found." For one suspended second, the whole room held still. Dale gave a nervous little laugh. "This ain't your business." Bear's eyes never left Rosa. "Ma'am, can you get to the wall behind me?" She nodded once, though the movement hurt. That was all. Deacon moved left. Slim moved right. Not swinging, not grandstanding, just taking space away from two violent men until there was none left for harm. Kenny made the mistake that small men make when their power starts slipping. He lunged, not even at Bear, but toward Rosa again, as if he could get one more hit in, the world would restore itself to his liking. He never made it. Bear caught his arm midair, twisted him down with ugly efficiency, and put him flat on the linoleum so fast Kenny's breath exploded out of him. At the same time, Deacon pinned Dale against the refrigerator, one massive forearm across his chest, not crushing, just holding with the finality of iron gates closing. "Don't," Deacon said softly. It was somehow more frightening than a shout. Tessa was already beside Rosa, kneeling in spilled rice and broken wood. "Stay with me. Look at my face." Her hands were warm and competent and clean. Any head injury, blurry vision. Rosa tried to answer, but her body was shaking too hard. It's all right, Tessa said. You don't have to be brave for 5 seconds. I've got the next 5 seconds. Outside, sirens were finally rising, and this is where a lot of stories would hurry. They would turn the bikers into avenging angels and the bad men into monsters, and call that satisfaction. But life is rarely saved by one moment alone. More often, it is saved by a chain of people who each did one decent thing before anybody realized a miracle was being assembled. Because Addie had known where to run for a reason. 3 months earlier, she had spilled orange soda in Mercy Lane Diner, and while her mother apologized in mortified whispers, Bear had crouched with paper towels and told Addie, "Spills aren't sins." He had pointed at the Iron Saints patch and explained they raised money for shelters and school coats and hospital rides. If you're ever scared in this town and you see this patch, you walk toward it, not away. 2 weeks after that, Miss Evelyn, the diner owner, had slipped extra mashed potatoes into Rosa's to-go bag and said, without making pity sound like pity, "Thursday nights, those riders meet out front before the fund run. Good men, loud engines, soft hearts." Then there was Mrs. Chen from upstairs in the duplex, who had begun leaving her hallway light on after she once heard shouting through the floorboards. She had told Addie while fixing the child's crooked braid one morning, "If bad noise starts, you go where there are witnesses." And there was Rosa herself, though she did not know it yet, who had spent years teaching her daughter the holiest kind of strength, not hardness, but direction. Run toward help, tell the truth fast. Do not protect the person who is hurting you just because he says he loves you. So when the night split open, Addie did not freeze forever. She ran. She remembered. She chose the patch. That was the hidden scaffold under the miracle. Small kindnesses, quiet instructions, ordinary people refusing to call themselves ordinary. Back in the apartment, Kenny was cursing into the floor. Dale had gone pale enough to look sick. Bear kept one knee firm between Kenny's shoulders, not out of cruelty, but to make sure the man could not recreate danger with one desperate movement. Slim read off the address to the dispatcher again. Domestic assault in progress, victim injured, 2 suspects restrained, child witness safe. Safe. The word drifted through the apartment like something from another language. Rosa heard it and started to cry. Not the loud, dramatic kind. Just the awful silent kind that comes when your body has been holding a door shut too long and finally cannot anymore. Tessa squeezed her hand. "That's okay, let it come." "Addie," Rosa whispered. "At the diner," Bear said immediately. "Dry, warm, with people." Rosa closed her eyes. For the first time that night, her face changed. Not because the pain was gone. Not because the fear was gone. Because uncertainty was gone. The cops arrived 3 minutes later, though it felt like an hour and a heartbeat at once. Deputy Lena Brooks entered first, short, steady, and all business. She took in the scene with one sweep and understood exactly who had prevented a murder and who had nearly committed one. Her partner cuffed Kenny and Dale while Lena knelt beside Rosa and said the sentence women like Rosa deserve to hear far more often than they do. You are not in trouble. Sometimes rescue begins with hands. Sometimes it begins with permission. Paramedics came next. One of them was a young man named Archero, who had once received a Christmas gift drive from the Iron Saints when his own father was too sick to work. He recognized Bear, gave a quick nod, and treated Rosa with the kind of tenderness that does not humiliate pain by making it public. By the time Rosa was placed carefully onto the stretcher, Addie was in the doorway wrapped in Tessa's jacket and Miss Evelyn's diner blanket. Clutching a paper cup of hot chocolate, she had not managed to drink. The child's face was blotchy and stunned, but when she saw her mother conscious, she ran to the stretcher and pressed both little palms against Rosa's arm. "I'm sorry I left." Rosa made a sound that might have broken every heart in that room. "No, baby," she whispered. "You saved me." Addie's mouth trembled. "I got the motorcycle people." At that, something passed over the faces of the deputies, the paramedics, the diner owner, and every one of the riders standing there wet from the rain. Not amusement. Not pride exactly. Recognition. Because the world had once again used its favorite disguise. It had sent mercy looking like menace. Bear took a step back toward the wall, as if to make the moment smaller so it could belong to mother and daughter alone. But Addie looked over at him through all that blanket and steam and tears and asked, "Did I do it right?" Bear, who had buried a wife 14 years earlier and a son before that, who had spent too much of his life believing the worst thing about him was the first thing people saw, had to clear his throat before he could answer. "You did it perfect." At the hospital, the damage was ugly but survivable. Cracked rib, bruised cheekbone, sprained wrist, concussion symptoms to watch. Worse than the chart could measure was the long fatigue of being hunted by someone who once promised to keep you safe. But for the first time, Rosa was not being sent back into the dark with only instructions and paperwork. Deputy Brooks filed for an emergency protective order before her shift ended. Tessa called Haven House, the women's shelter the Iron Saints had raised money for that very night, and secured Rosa and Addie a private room. Miss Evelyn sent over a bag with clean clothes, 2 grilled cheese sandwiches wrapped in foil, Addie's stuffed rabbit retrieved from the apartment, and a note written in blue ink. No rent, no debt. No shame. Just heal. Deacon and Slim spent half the night at the duplex helping police document damage while Mrs. Chen packed Rosa's important papers into a grocery sack. Birth certificates, medication, school forms, a photo of Addie at age 4 missing her front teeth. Archero, the paramedic, came off shift and quietly paid for the prescription the hospital's social worker worried might have to wait until morning. A life is rebuilt that way too, not in speeches. In bags packed, forms signed, lights left on, people remembering what you need before you can bear to ask. 2 weeks later, Kenny Bell sat in county court in an orange jumpsuit, his swagger finally stripped down to its real size. Dale took a plea. There were witness statements, photographs, audio from the dispatch call, body cam footage, medical records, and one little girl's simple account, delivered in a child advocacy room, painted with murals of trees. No confusion. No, he said, she said. No place left for intimidation to hide. Rosa wore a borrowed navy blouse to the hearing and a pale scarf over the fading bruises at her neck. Her wrist still ached. Loud male voices still made her flinch. But when the judge asked whether she wanted to make a statement, she stood, not because she felt fearless, because she was tired of fear being the loudest voice in the room. "My daughter," she said, steadying herself against the podium only once, "should never know what it sounds like when a man hates himself more than he loves his family. But she does. And because she does, I am asking this court to make sure she never hears it from him again. There are sentences that do not sound large when spoken aloud. Yet they divide a life into before and after." That was one. The order was granted, charges held, bail denied. Outside the courthouse, rain had washed the steps clean. The Iron Saints were there, not crowding, just present, engines off. Vests dark with drizzle. Tessa held a small bouquet of grocery store daisies tied with a red rubber band. Miss Evelyn had baked banana bread and wrapped it in wax paper. Mrs. Chen stood with an umbrella and a thermos. Deputy Brooks, off duty now, leaned against the railing sipping coffee from a paper cup. Addie saw them and broke into the first full smile anyone had seen on her face since that night. To her, they did not look like a biker club. They looked like what they had become, her people. Months passed. Rosa got a job at Haven House first, then at the diner again for day shifts only, while the shelter helped with legal aid, counseling. and a small apartment with windows that locked properly, and a front door that did not sag on its hinges. Addie started sleeping through most nights. Not all. Most. Bear taught a free Saturday bicycle repair workshop in the shelter parking lot. Deacon brought his foster kids and a toolbox heavy enough to start a civilization. Slim, who barely spoke unless necessary, showed Addie how to check whether a room had 2 exits without making it into a scary lesson. Tessa taught Rosa how trauma lives in the body, and how healing is not weakness just because it shakes. One bright autumn afternoon, when the maple trees outside Haven House had turned the color of old copper pennies, the Iron Saints held their annual coat drive. Addie sat at a folding table with a marker and a stack of donor cards, solemn as a treasurer. She had grown half an inch and cut her own bangs too short. A little boy arrived clinging to his grandmother's hand, eyeing the bikers the way frightened children eye thunder. Addie hopped down from her chair, walked over in her puffy pink vest, and said with the authority of someone who had learned something costly and true, "It's okay. They look loud, but they're not mean." The adults went quiet. Bear turned away for a second under the pretense of sorting helmets because some feelings are too large to be witnessed directly. Later, as the sun lowered gold across the parking lot, Addie climbed onto the curb beside him and leaned against his arm. She was holding a sugar cookie shaped like a star. "Mr. Bear, yeah. Baby, why did you help us?" He looked out over the lot where riders and shelter volunteers and schoolteachers and cashiers and tired mothers and restless children moved among boxes of coats and canned goods and folding chairs. The whole scene looked patched together from ordinary materials, which is to say, it looked holy. "Because someone should have helped sooner," he said. Addie considered that with the grave concentration children bring to the truth, then she nodded. "I'm gonna be that for people." Bear smiled, though his eyes shone. "I believe you. And maybe that was the real miracle, not that violent men were stopped, not that justice, for once, arrived on time, not even that a little girl found the right strangers in the rain. The miracle was what happened after. A child who had seen terror learned to recognize safety. A woman who had been reduced to survival learned to stand in rooms without apologizing for taking up space. A group of men the world often judged by noise and leather became, in one family's story, the sound of rescue. Because love does not always come looking polished. Sometimes it comes with engine grease on its hands. Sometimes it stands in a diner parking lot under a broken neon sign. Sometimes it is made of former sinners, tired nurses, widowed mechanics, immigrant neighbors, overworked deputies, and women who keep extra blankets behind counters just in case life splits open nearby. And when it is real, it does not ask whether you are impressive. It asks whether you are in danger. It asks whether you are hungry. It asks whether your child knows where to run. Years later, Addie would remember almost none of the legal language, little of the hospital smell, and only flashes of the apartment itself. Trauma is strange that way. It tears up some pages and preserves others with impossible clarity. What she would remember forever was the sight of all those motorcycles gleaming wet under the parking lot lights. The feel of a big scarred hand turning gentle around hers. The sound of a man with a thunderstorm face saying, "Look at me." And the certainty, sudden and total, that the world had not run out of people willing to stand between the weak and the cruel. That certainty can save a life more than once. So if this story stayed with you, let it stay for the right reason, not because evil exists. We know it does. Not because fear is powerful. We know that too. Let it stay because one child ran toward hope instead of away from it, and hope answered. In the end, that may be all courage really is, not the absence of terror. Just knowing which direction to move while your heart is breaking. And if you believe more people should hear stories like this, stories where kindness is brave, where dignity survives, and where the faces we fear sometimes become the hands that save us. Share this one, and stay with us for the next story.